Part 1. The ship hung in orbit above Earth for 3 standard cycles before anyone made contact. Ambassadors spent those days watching the planet spin below, studying the patterns of light that spread across the dark side like glowing webs. The humans built their cities bright. They were not afraid to be seen. This was 47th First Contact Mission. She had introduced the collective to species that breathed methane, species that communicated through color changes in their skin, and one memorable species that existed as a shared consciousness, spread across thousands of small bodies. None of those missions had worried her. The collective had protocols for everything. They had been making contact with new civilizations for over 10,000 years. Humans would be no different. They were young, isolated, still bound to a single planet. Their radio signals had only been reaching into space for a little over a century. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, they were newborns. The invitation to land came on the 4th day. Selected a small delegation and prepared the standard gifts, a database of galactic languages, a star map showing the nearest 100 inhabited systems, and a small device that could purify any water. Simple things, useful things. The kind of gifts that showed good intentions without overwhelming a primitive species. The landing site was a large building in a city the humans called New York. Thousands of them had gathered to watch, held back by barriers and armed guards, noted the weapons with interest. The humans still used projectile devices, chemical propellants pushing metal at high speeds, crude but effective. The collective had used similar tools about 8,000 years ago. The first meetings were formal and careful. The humans had prepared translators, though the collective's language software was far superior. They had prepared gifts of their own, samples of their art, their music, their food, accepted everything graciously. She had done this dozens of times before. The human leaders asked the expected questions. Were they peaceful? Yes, the collective had not fought a war in 10,000 years. Were there other species in the galaxy? Many and most were friendly. Would they share their technology? In time, yes, though there were protocols to follow. The uplift process usually took several generations. The humans seemed satisfied with these answers. They were eager, perhaps too eager, but that was normal for young species. They wanted everything immediately. They did not understand that the galaxy moved slowly, that patience was the greatest virtue a civilization could develop. The formal meetings ended after 3 days. Then came the cultural exchange phase, which always enjoyed most. This was when she learned what a species truly valued, what they celebrated, what they remembered. A civilization's history told you everything about its future. The humans assigned her a guide named David. He was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old, which meant he had already lived a third of his expected. This still amazed. They lived for nearly 500 years. Humans burned so briefly, yet they seemed to accomplish so much in their small windows of time. David took her to museums first. The humans kept careful records of their past, storing objects and images and documents in great buildings for anyone to see. This was a good sign. Species that remembered their history usually learned from it. The first museum focused on art, admired the paintings and sculptures, noting how human aesthetics had changed over their short history. The second museum focused on science and technology. She saw their early flying machines, their first computers, their primitive rockets, impressive progress for such a young species. The third museum was different. David called it a history museum. The building was large and gray, filled with objects from something the humans called World War II, walked through rooms filled with uniforms and weapons and photographs of destruction. The scale of the violence was startling. Millions of humans had died in this conflict, killed by other humans using increasingly efficient methods. This was not entirely surprising. Most species went through violent phases in their development. They themselves had fought wars long ago, before they developed the consensus protocols that now governed their society. Violence was often a symptom of poor communication. Once a species learned to truly understand each other, war became unnecessary. But then David led her to a different section of the museum. This part was quieter, more somber. The lights were dim. The humans who walked through spoke in whispers. The section was dedicated to something called the Holocaust. Listened as David explained, his voice careful and sad. One group of humans had decided that another group of humans was inferior, dangerous, unworthy of life. They had built facilities specifically designed to kill as many of these other humans as possible. 6 million people had been murdered, not in battle, not in conflict, but systematically, industrially, as a matter of policy. Felt something cold settle in her chest. She had seen violence before. She had seen species that killed for territory, for resources, for survival. But this was different. This was organized. This was deliberate. This was killing not for any practical purpose, but because of beliefs, because of ideas about who deserved to exist. She asked David to continue the tour. The next room focused on political leaders. David pointed to photographs and explained their significance. This man, Abraham Lincoln, had led his nation through a civil war and ended the practice of slavery. He had been shot in the head by another human who disagreed with his politics. This man, John Kennedy, had been a young and popular leader. He had been shot by a hidden attacker while riding through a city. This man, Martin King, had fought for equal rights through peaceful means. He had been shot on a balcony by someone who hated his message. Asked David to slow down. She needed to understand. These leaders had not been killed in wars. They had not been killed in battles. They had been specifically targeted and eliminated by individual humans who disagreed with their ideas. David nodded. He seemed uncomfortable but continued. He explained that this practice had a name: assassination. It had existed throughout all of human history, in every culture, on every continent. Leaders, reformers, thinkers, anyone who became powerful or influential enough could become a target. Some assassins worked alone, driven by personal hatred. Others were sent by governments, by organizations, by rival factions. He listed more names. Julius Caesar, stabbed by members of his own government. Mahatma, shot by a man who opposed his vision for their nation. Archduke Ferdinand, whose death had triggered a war that killed millions. The names kept coming, dozens of them, hundreds throughout history. Asked the obvious question: had the humans developed better security? Had they found ways to prevent this? David laughed, though there was no humor in it. He explained that humans had developed entire agencies dedicated to protecting important individuals. They had also developed entire agencies dedicated to killing important individuals. Sometimes the same government ran both types of agencies. The practice had not stopped. It had simply become more sophisticated. The tour continued, but was no longer fully present. Her mind was racing, processing this new information, trying to fit it into her understanding of the universe. She had met predator species before. She had studied warriors and conquerors. She understood violence as a tool for survival, as a response to threats, as a failure of communication. But the humans did not fit any of these categories. The humans killed each other over ideas. They killed their own leaders, their own visionaries, their own people, not because those individuals threatened their survival, but because those individuals held beliefs they found unacceptable. They had been doing this for their entire history. They showed no signs of stopping. That night, returned to her ship and began composing a report for the collective. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. For the first time in her long career, she was not sure what to recommend. The humans were not what they appeared to be. They smiled and offered gifts and spoke of peace, but beneath that surface was something the collective had never encountered before, something that frightened her in ways she could not fully explain. She worked through the night, choosing her words carefully. The collective needed to understand. They needed to prepare. Because whatever the humans were, they were not like any species they had ever met. Part 2. The collective receives report within hours of its transmission. The distance between Earth and the nearest communication relay was nearly 40 light-years, but quantum entanglement made such distances meaningless for information transfer. By the time finished her morning meal, the Council of Voices had already convened an emergency session. This was unusual. The Council of Voices was the highest governing body of the collective, responsible for decisions that affected all 12 star systems and the trillions of citizens who lived within them. They met rarely, usually only a few times per century. Most matters could be handled by local councils or automated systems. The full council only gathered when something truly significant demanded their attention. This report had triggered more than a gathering. It had triggered something the collective had not experienced in 10,000 years: fear. The council consisted of 144 members, each representing a different region or interest group within the collective. They met in a vast chamber a room designed specifically for deliberation and consensus building. The walls were curved to ensure every voice carried equally. The lighting was soft and even, creating no shadows, no hidden corners. Everything about the space was meant to encourage openness and understanding. Today, the chamber felt different. The usual calm had been replaced by something tense and watchful. The council members spoke in low voices, clustering in small groups, sharing their reactions to his report. Elder called the session to order. She was the oldest member of the council, nearly 400 years old, her scales faded to pale silver with age. She had served on the council for over 2 centuries. She had seen civilizations rise and fall. She had helped guide the collective through countless challenges. She had never seen anything like the human report. The session began with a formal reading of findings. The council listened in silence as the details unfolded. The museums of violence, the history of assassination, the systematic elimination of individuals based on their beliefs, the names and dates and methods stretching back through all of human recorded history. When the reading finished, Elder opened the floor for discussion. The first speaker was a military analyst named Vol. He had spent his career studying potential threats to the collective, developing defensive strategies against hostile species. His assessment was clinical and precise. The humans, he explained, were not particularly dangerous in conventional terms. Their technology was primitive. Their weapons could not penetrate shields. Their ships could not match speeds. In any direct military confrontation, the collective would win easily. A single battle group could neutralize Earth's entire defensive capability within hours. But conventional military analysis missed the point entirely. Vol pulled up historical data from other first contact missions. He showed the council how different species responded to external threats. Most species united when faced with a common enemy. They put aside internal conflicts and worked together for survival. This was basic evolutionary psychology, observed across hundreds of different civilizations. The humans would do the same. That was not the concern. The concern was what the humans did when they were not facing external threats. The concern was what they did to each other, constantly, throughout their entire history, without any outside pressure forcing them toward violence. Vol displayed a chart showing human political assassinations over the past 500 years. The numbers were staggering. Leaders, reformers, activists, thinkers, shot, stabbed, poisoned, bombed. Some killed by lone individuals, others by organized groups, others by their own governments. The methods had changed over time, becoming more sophisticated, but the practice itself had never stopped. He then displayed a second chart showing the resources humans devoted to this practice: training programs for assassins, intelligence agencies dedicated to targeting individuals, security details meant to protect potential targets, counterintelligence operations to identify threats, billions of human currency units spent every year, not on weapons of war, but on the careful, precise elimination of specific people. The humans had turned assassination into an industry. They had developed it into an art form. They practiced it constantly, hunting their skills against each other, perfecting techniques that the rest of the galaxy had abandoned ago. The council sat in troubled silence as Vol finished his presentation. Then a new speaker rose, a cultural analyst named Vara. Her specialty was understanding how different species thought, what motivated them, what they feared and desired. She offered a different perspective on the human data. They had eliminated internal violence through consensus. When everyone agreed on a course of action, there was no need for conflict. Disagreements were resolved through patient discussion, sometimes lasting years or even decades. The process was slow, but it was peaceful. The humans had taken a different path. They had not eliminated disagreement. They had not developed consensus protocols. Instead, they had learned to live with constant internal conflict, constant competition, constant struggle for power and influence. In such an environment, assassination made a terrible kind of sense. If you could not convince your opponents, you could eliminate them. If you could not win an argument, you could silence the person making it. The humans had not developed patience. They had developed efficiency. And they had become very, very good at it. Vara shared examples from human history. She showed how assassination had shaped the course of nations, ended dynasties, started wars, changed the direction of entire civilizations. The humans did not treat this as shameful or unusual. They taught it in their schools. They wrote books about it. They made entertainment depicting it. To the humans, assassination was simply a tool, a dangerous tool, an illegal tool in most cases, but a tool nonetheless. Something to be used when other methods failed. Something that existed as a constant possibility, a shadow hanging over anyone who gained enough power or influence to attract attention. The council members began to understand what it tried to convey. The humans were not dangerous because of their weapons or their ships or their technology. They were dangerous because of how they thought. A species that eliminated its own leaders over political disagreements would not hesitate to eliminate external threats. A species that trained assassins and sent them against targets within their own civilization would certainly send them against alien targets. A species that accepted assassination as a normal part of political life would never truly be at peace with anyone. Elder called for a brief recess. The council members needed time to process what they had learned. They gathered in small groups, discussing the implications, debating possible responses. When the session resumed, the tone had shifted. The fear was still present, but it had crystallized into something more focused. The council was no longer simply reacting to surprising information. They were now trying to determine what to do about it. Several options were proposed. Some council members suggested avoiding the humans entirely, quarantining their system, and preventing them from expanding into the galaxy. Others suggested aggressive intervention, using superior technology to disarm the humans and force them to adopt more peaceful practices. A few suggested that the concerns were exaggerated, that the humans could be integrated into galactic civilization like any other species. Each option was discussed thoroughly. The consensus protocols required that every voice be heard, every perspective considered. But as the discussion continued, a new possibility began to emerge. What if the humans could not be contained? What if they could not be changed? What if everything the collective had learned about them indicated that they would continue their practices regardless of outside pressure? They had dealt with aggressive species before. They had developed sophisticated strategies for managing potential threats, but those strategies all assumed certain things about how intelligent beings behaved. They assumed that species would act rationally to preserve themselves. They assumed that violence was a means to an end, not an end in itself. They assumed that sufficient incentives or sufficient force could change behavior. The humans violated all of these assumptions. The humans killed their own leaders, knowing that it would create instability. They trained assassins, knowing that those skills might someday be turned against themselves. They accepted constant political violence as normal, even though it made their societies less stable, less productive, less safe. They were not acting rationally by standards. They were acting like humans. And that, elders slowly realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. As the session continued into its second day, a new consensus began to form. It was not the kind of consensus the council usually reached. It was not calm and reasoned and patient. It was the consensus of fear. The collective needed to make a decision about the humans, and for once, they needed to make it quickly. Part 3. Received the council's decision 3 days after submitting her report. She read it twice, then a third time, certain she had misunderstood something. The instructions were clear, but they went against everything she had been trained to do. She was to offer complete and unconditional surrender to the humans, not partnership, not alliance, surrender. The collective had never surrendered to anyone. They had never needed to. In 10,000 years of expansion across 12 star systems, they had encountered hundreds of species. Some had been hostile at first. Some had required careful management, but all of them had eventually been integrated into the collective's peaceful framework. Violence was always temporary. Consensus was eternal. But the council had decided that the humans were different. They could not be integrated. They could not be changed. They could only be accommodated. Prepared for her final meeting with the human delegation. The humans had noticed her absence over the past few days. David had sent several messages asking if everything was all right. The formal diplomatic channels had expressed concern about the sudden pause in negotiations. They were eager to continue, eager to learn about the galaxy, eager to take their place among the stars. They had no idea what was about to happen. The meeting was held in the same building where first contact had occurred. Arrived with a small delegation, carrying a single data device that contained the terms of surrender. She walked past the human security guards without looking at them. She had seen their weapons, studied their tactics, reviewed their history. She knew exactly what they were capable of. The human leaders were waiting in a large conference room. There were 12 of them, representing different nations and organizations. They smiled and stood as entered. They had prepared refreshments, arranged comfortable seating, hung decorative banners expressing friendship and cooperation. Did not sit down. She placed the data device on the table and activated it. A holographic display appeared, showing the terms of the collective's offer. The humans leaned forward, curious and excited. They expected trade agreements, technology transfers, the usual arrangements between spacefaring civilizations. What they saw instead was complete submission. The collective would immediately share all technological databases with humanity. Faster-than-light travel, advanced medicine, energy production, manufacturing techniques. Everything that had developed over 10,000 years would be given freely, without conditions or restrictions. The collective would provide complete star maps showing the location of every inhabited system, every resource deposit, every strategic position in the galaxy. Nothing would be hidden. Nothing would be held back. The collective would recognize human authority over an initial sphere of expansion covering 50 light-years from Earth. This territory would be exclusively human. No ship would enter without explicit permission. In exchange, the collective asked for only one thing: formal acknowledgement of alliance. The humans would consider their partners, their friends, their fellow travelers in the galaxy. They would not treat the collective as an obstacle or a threat. The human leaders stared at the display in confusion. Several of them began speaking at once, asking questions, demanding clarification. This was not how negotiations worked. This was not how first contact had ever gone, according to their own records and expectations. Waited for the noise to die down. Then she explained. Her voice was calm and measured, but her words carried weight. She told the humans that the collective had studied their history carefully. They had learned about the wars, the genocides, the systematic violence that ran through human civilization like blood through veins. They had seen the monuments to fallen leaders, the endless lists of those who had been eliminated for their beliefs. She told them about the Council's deliberations. She explained how they had analyzed human behavior, searching for patterns, trying to understand what drove a species to kill its own visionaries. She described the fear that had spread through the council chambers, the realization that the humans were unlike anything they had ever encountered. The collective had faced hostile species before, continued. They had developed strategies for managing aggression, containing violence, slowly transforming warriors into peaceful citizens. These strategies assumed that violence was a means to an end, that it would stop once the end was achieved. But the humans did not use violence as a means to an end. They used it constantly against each other, regardless of circumstances. They killed their own leaders not because those leaders threatened their survival, but because those leaders held ideas they found unacceptable. They trained assassins and spies and infiltrators not for war, but for politics. The collective had run thousands of simulations trying to predict what would happen if they came into conflict with humanity. The results were always the same. They could win battles. Their technology was superior, their ships faster, their weapons more powerful. They could destroy human fleets and conquer human planets. But they could never be safe. The humans would not stop. They would send agents into space, patient and smiling, waiting years or decades for the right moment to strike. They would target leaders, scientists, anyone who seemed important to the collective's functioning. They would teach their children to continue the fight, passing down grudges across generations. They had no defense against this. They had eliminated assassination from their own society so long ago that they had forgotten how to guard against it. They had no secret police, no counterintelligence agencies, no security forces trained to detect hidden threats. They had trusted in openness and consensus. Against the humans, that trust would be fatal. Paused, letting her words settle over the room. The human leaders were silent now, their expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been pride. She continued with the council's final assessment. The collective did not want to fight the humans. They did not want to contain them or change them or integrate them. They simply wanted to survive. And the best way to ensure survival was to make absolutely certain that humanity had no reason to view thee as an obstacle. Hence the surrender, hence the gifts, hence the recognition of human territory and human authority. They were not offering partnership because they admired humanity. They were offering everything because they feared what humanity would do if they offered anything less. One of the human leaders, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, finally spoke. She asked if this was some kind of test, some kind of elaborate first contact ritual designed to evaluate human responses. Assured her that it was not. Another leader asked if the collective truly believed that humanity was so dangerous. His tone suggested he found the idea flattering but absurd. Humans were just humans, after all. They had problems, yes. They had violence and conflict and all the other messy parts of civilization. But they were trying to improve. They were working toward peace. Looked at him with something like sadness. The humans, she explained, did not understand what made them special. They had lived with their own nature for so long that they could not see how unusual it was. They thought that all intelligent species struggled with violence, that all civilizations produced assassins and secret police, that all histories were written in blood. They were wrong. They had met hundreds of species across the galaxy. Some were aggressive, some were warlike, some had taken centuries to pacify, but none of them, not a single one, had developed assassination into a cultural institution. None of them had built entire industries around the precise elimination of individual beings based on their beliefs. The humans had done this naturally, spontaneously, across every culture and every era of their history. They had never stopped. They showed no signs of stopping. They were, in the collective's assessment, the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, not because of their weapons or their ships or their numbers, because of how they thought, because of what they were willing to do to their own people in pursuit of political goals. What would such a species do to aliens who stood in their way? The collective did not want to find out. Finished her explanation and stood quietly, waiting for the humans to respond. The room remained silent for a long moment. The human leaders looked at each other, at the holographic display still showing the terms of surrender, at the alien ambassador who had just told them they were too terrifying to fight. Finally, the gray-haired woman spoke again. She said that she would need to consult with other leaders, that a decision of this magnitude could not be made immediately. But she asked one more question first. Did the collective truly believe that humanity could not change, that they would always be this way? Considered her answer carefully. She had studied human history extensively now. She had seen the patterns repeat across. She had watched leaders rise and fall, reformers emerge and die, cycles of violence continue without end. But she had also seen something else. She had seen humans mourn their fallen leaders. She had seen them build monuments and write histories and swear that such things would never happen again. She had seen the grief and the guilt and the desperate hope that the next generation might be better. The humans were not unaware of their nature. They simply could not escape it. Told the woman that she did not know if humanity could change. The collective had not existed long enough to know if any species could truly transform its fundamental nature. Perhaps in another 10,000 years, the humans would be different. Perhaps they would learn to resolve their differences without violence. But the collective could not wait 10,000 years to find out. They needed to make decisions based on what the humans were now, not what they might become someday. And right now, the humans were terrifying. The woman nodded slowly. She seemed to understand, even if she did not agree. The meeting ended shortly after. The human leaders took the data device and promised to review the collective's offer carefully, returned to her ship and prepared for departure. Her mission was complete. Whatever happened next was beyond her control. As her ship rose from Earth's surface, climbing through the atmosphere toward the stars, allowed herself one final look at the planet below. The lights were still spreading across the dark side, glowing webs of human civilization, bright and defiant against the void. The humans were so young, so brief, so fragile in so many ways. And yet the collective, spanning 12 star systems and 10,000 years of history, had just surrendered to them. Not because they were strong, because they were something far more dangerous. They were patient, they were persistent, they were creative in their violence. And they practiced their deadliest skills on each other. The galaxy would never be the same.